Welcome to another Wings of Kentucky. This month we're going to talk about Thanksgiving birds, talk about a few of the species that we like to, let's say, think about a lot on Thanksgiving and around the Thanksgiving holiday, and some of the other species that might be, let's say, Thanksgiving adjacent, or if you perhaps have a more exotic Thanksgiving, they may also potentially feature. So, of course, Thanksgiving is right around the corner. We often think about birds, such as these domestic wild turkeys, as playing a big role at the Thanksgiving feast. I know I certainly do. One bird in particular, many of us are thinking about, of course, is the turkey. I'm certainly no stranger to that. Um, and what I'm hoping to do today with this month's Wings of Kentucky is talk about where do these domesticated birds come from, right? We see a bird like this, these two tom turkeys here on the right, and we often think about, okay, that's our domesticated turkey. That's what we eat for Thanksgiving. But they haven't always been like this. They come from a significantly wilder background, and we're going to talk about that today. Oh, and as well as how do these birds differ from their wild counterparts? So this domesticated turkey is quite different than a eastern wild turkey we might see here in the woods and fields of Kentucky. Drinking a little coffee while we're doing this today. So we'll start, of course, with the wild turkey, Meleagris gallopavo. It's a really interesting bird species, one of our largest birds in Kentucky. I've got a variety of images here. And they're native to North America, found throughout parts of Canada, the US, Mexico, etc. And they're excellent flyers. I did a little bit of deer hunting over the weekend. We had wild turkeys roosting in the trees right above us. It's an interesting behavior, actually, that they roost in trees at nighttime, given how, I mean, they're very skilled flyers compared to some creatures, but by bird standards, they're fairly clumsy. And I mean, getting all the way up into the top of a tree, there must be something pretty significant on the ground that they do not want to encounter at nighttime. Now, I've got images here of a couple of females, which we call hens, and a couple of males here that we call toms, although young males are often called jakes. But we're going to call them toms for the purposes of this conversation. So we've got a couple of hens and a couple of toms here. Pretty easy to tell apart. Plumage-wise, they're very similar. Both have kind of this purpley pink leg. But notice on the female, we've got this kind of very heavily blue head with very little ornamentation. They don't have much in the way of the snoot. They have a little bit of one, but not nearly like the male. And much fewer of these warty growths all over the head. And whereas the male obviously has all those things, has a much bigger wattle, much longer snoot, etc. And of course, if you can see the breast, the male has this tuft of feathers that kind of resemble hair called a beard. And if you looked at the legs, I should have put a picture in here, the male has a little spur on each leg that they use for fighting. So again, male has that colorful head, the large snoot and the beard, as well as spurs. The other thing the turkeys are kind of famous for is their fanning and strutting display. So this is kind of what turkeys look like when they're just walking around, but their fanning display is very beautiful and something very iconic. So there's a male tom turkey strutting and displaying in an attempt to either attract a mate or maybe practice his courtship for springtime. They also make all kinds of noises. I've got a couple audio files here from Zeno Canto to listen to. Here's the female hen clucking that they can just do anytime to sort of stay as a group and keep in contact with other turkeys. So let's see if I can play that. Probably wouldn't hurt for me to turn up my volume really quick. Make sure I've got all that all the way up there. So let's play that one more time. Now, that might be the call they make the most, but that's certainly not the call they're most famous for. That's certainly the gobble. Let's listen to an audio file of a wild turkey gobbling. Now that gobble is a pretty unusual sound. I mean, even by bird standards, and birds make a wide variety of calls, but that gobble is a very bizarre vocalization. And actually, it's used for courtship display, attracting a mate, as well as defending a little area from males. So by those definitions or by those descriptions, it would be technically a bird's song. So the gobble is the turkey's song. Now, of course, let me move this out of the way here. Meleagris gallopavo domesticus is our domesticated wild turkey, domesticated in Mexico about 2,000 years ago. And these are pretty different than their domestic counterparts. They are generally unable to fly. They're quite large, 45 pounds at times. They're huge birds, sometimes even larger than our native swans. And of course, their plumage is very different than our sorry about that. Plumage is quite different from our wild turkeys. Okay, next up is red junglefowl, Gallus gallus. So that's the red junglefowl, the species from which our chickens were domesticated. So we're going to dive in a little bit of the background and ecology of this species. Again, the domesticated chicken ancestor. It's actually a tropical pheasant species. We've got, of course, the male here and the couple of females down here. So this is what a wild chicken would look like. And in fact, in many cases, they've been reintroduced back into the wild, domesticated chickens. And they eventually, after a few generations, start to look pretty similar to these birds as they kind of revert back to their natural forms. They're very small birds compared to our domesticated chickens, although as we'll discuss in a few minutes, there are some small domesticated chicken breeds. And red junglefowl, Gallus, can fly short distances. Males crow to defend territories, just like a regular domesticated rooster, so I didn't put an audio file of that in here. And clutches of young are raised by the females. Now, of course, our domesticated chickens can look pretty different from this. Easily the most famous domesticated bird, domesticated about 5,000 years ago. And this is just a kind of a grab bag of domesticated birds, or domesticated chickens. This is a barred rock here. We've got a Polish chicken here, and I don't claim to know all these. This one is a white silky. This is a frizzled cochin or something along those lines. So you've got a wide variety of phenotypes in our domesticated chickens, but it was not the first domesticated bird, however. We're going to actually talk about what that is, and I believe we end with that species. So all these domesticated breeds of chicken, some are bred for their eggs, some are bred for their meat. The Cornish Rock, for example, is a hybrid of multiple breeds that is kind of really good for meat production. Others are bred for show and hobby, et cetera, et cetera. And now most chickens are flightless, or are like largely flightless. Some are entirely flightless. As far as I know, the silkie, for example, is flightless because of the way its feathers are sort of mutated through captive rearing and so forth. Other chicken breeds can fly a little bit, but like really not, not very well. Okay, next up is the mallard, Anas platyrhynchos, found all across the northern hemisphere. Many of us are familiar with this bird, with the male, this guy here, and the female being very different in terms of plumage and the quote-unquote soft parts. Like the female has this orange bill with a black saddle, male has a yellow bill, and both have these bright orange legs, beautiful birds. We've talked about this species before, but one thing we don't often talk about is the differences in vocalizations. The male and female quacks are totally different. So the female has a very loud quack, and the male has a soft quack, and also incorporates some peeps into its courtship display. So I'm going to play for you the calls of each. The male will have these little peeps, which is the courtship display, as well as these quiet, soft little quacks. Very soft little quacks. Now let's listen to the female, significantly louder and raspier. So mallards are a migratory bird species in the wild, but they're very cold hardy. As long as there's open water around, you can expect a few mallards to stick around in various parts of Kentucky. And it's what we call a dabbling duck as well. So when they forage, they tip their front end underwater, their head and their breast and their neck, and they sort of feed on the bottom of the water, and their butt and their back leg or their legs are sort of sticking up, flapping in the air, kind of looking a little bit silly. Now, Anis platyrhynchos domesticus is the domestic duck. Almost all domesticated ducks are actually just mallards. There's one very sort of brief exception. We'll discuss that in a moment. But these include all the small breeds of duck, like the Mccoi duck, and these really large-bodied breeds, like the Pigeon duck, which are a meat breed, and any other breeds of duck. They're very commonly released into city parks after people buy them for Easter or what have you, and get bored of keeping them. And dump them into various parks, or occasionally escape. Different breeds of domestic duck they basically vary in the degree to which they can fly. So like whatever breed this is could probably fly very well. A Pekin duck would probably not be able to fly at all. Now that other duck breed that I mentioned, it's a species but has a domesticated form, is the honorable mention Mccoi Duck. So it is this weird, goofy-looking bird here that kind of has like warts on its face and a mohawk. Originally from Latin America, it's been domesticated fairly recently, with the males being significantly larger than the females. And as a result, the females can fly, but the males often can't. So again, we've got that warty face. Females have a few warts on the face. I believe this is a female here. Much fewer warts than you would see on a male. And we've also got feral populations of these domestic Mccoi ducks in Florida. Okay, the rock dove Columba livia. This is a cool species. Many of us probably don't feel too warm and fuzzy when we think about rock doves, or also called the domestic pigeon. At least that's what we call them in Kentucky. But the rock dove Columba livia is a species native to Europe, Africa, and Asia. It's a very large-bodied species of dove, sometimes called the rock pigeon. And it's probably worth noting that pigeon and dove are mostly synonyms, like the term pigeon or dove. Like pigeons are doves, and arguably doves are pigeons. As a general rule, species of dove that are large tend to get called pigeon, but again, they're all really just doves. And as with many species of dove, the rock dove is monogamous, which is pretty cool. So the male and female sort of stay together for life unless somebody dies, and then they move on. And they produce 2 squabs per nest. So I'm going to show you some baby pigeons here in a few minutes, but they lay 2 eggs per clutch. Those 2 eggs hatch and into 2 squabs, and they may repeatedly nest. So they may make 3 or 4 nests in a year if it's a very productive year, but only have a clutch of 2 babies per year. And in the wild, they nest on cliffs in very dry areas. Now we've domesticated the rock dove, Columba livia domesticus, into a million different forms. Very variable phenotype, and this actually is the first domesticated bird more than 10,000 years ago. They have really distinct homing instincts. They can be used to carry messages. They're used even today for racing, and they're also highly edible. For instance, there's a species or breed, excuse me, that's ironically called the runt pigeon, which is a very large breed of pigeon. And that's very, very large and bred for meat. Delicious birds. I mean, it's one of those birds where people think, oh, pigeons are gross, and there's some things that are kind of gross about them, but like in terms of like birds, they're extremely tasty. There are hunters out there who will pursue feral pigeons, and their meat is actually very delicious. Now, of course, we've got tons of feral pigeons, often nesting on buildings that act as cliffs for nest sites, and people feed them, so they congregate in large numbers. The other thing I like to point out is there are many of these white pigeons that you see around, and those are usually, sometimes they're escaped from someone, a pigeon fancier raising pigeons, but more often than not, they're sold for a wedding and then released as wedding doves. And of course, they technically are doves, but you and I both know the dirty little secret that they actually are pigeon, which is a sort of special kind of dove. And because pigeons have such good homing instincts, these large rock doves that are white are released at the wedding, and they fly right back to the guy who sold them to the wedding, which is a pretty good business model because then you can sell it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and it keeps flying back. And people have asked me, like, why do I never see baby pigeons? And the reason is that they nest either on cliffs or oftentimes in cavities in like buildings, usually old structures. So they like to hide their nests really well. And their babies are what we call altricial. So the little babies are born. These ones are a few days old. They're like basically blind and helpless and kind of covered with this weird yellow down. They can't walk or really move much at all when they're babies. So this is what they look like, and they have to be fed all of their meals from their parents. This is the development of these ugly little babies into some slightly less ugly, but still ugly juveniles. We will leave it at that for this month. So whatever you're eating, happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for tuning in to Wings of Kentucky. Looking forward to chatting with you next month. I believe we will be talking about the 12 days of Christmas. So until then, have a happy Thanksgiving.